Welcome back to that Grief Relief podcast. This is episode something. I actually have no idea what number I'm going to put this at. I'm going to say 12, just so you're aware. Now, this is the first episode where I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone because I'm joined by someone who I literally do not know, never met. We've spoken before on social media, but then the irony of it is we're related. Richard Overy, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And you?
Yeah, I'm good. Right, so there's going to be a weird backstory to this. We have known each other through email and LinkedIn and social media for quite a few years now.
Yep.
Because you were speaking to my dad about our family tree.
That's correct,
because the surname Overy
is pretty unusual.
It's not exactly common, is it? So, and then next thing you know, you live in Dubai.
Small world.
There's not many Overys around. And we discussed then another guy called Rob Overy, who I kind of knew here on social media. And I genuinely didn't know that we were related.
Yeah.
And how are we related?
Well,
or how do we think we're related?
I do know this to be correct. Your father and I shared the same great-great-grandfather, which I think that makes us third cousins.
So would that make us once removed?
I get lost in it. I think you are my third cousin once removed.
Right.
But I would be your fourth cousin once removed upwards. I get a bit lost in all of that.
It's so confusing.
Yeah.
So, and we mentioned earlier, because the family lines are Jeffrey and William. So it's our great-great-grandfather.
Yeah.
Was one of six.
Yeah.
One of them being William.
Yeah.
Your line.
Yeah.
And Jeffrey is my line.
That's correct.
And the reason I know that is because my dad was Stephen Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Russell is Russell Jeffrey and Mason is Mason Jeffrey. And
I'm Richard William.
No way.
Yeah.
And that's all sort of the same down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we were just we had a really long chat beforehand because it's honestly, it's so bizarre that this is going to be a really strange one for me because I literally don't know anything about you, let alone your entire story. Whereas I've had a couple of people on whom I've never met, but I've known them quite well through the industry or social media and things like that. But yeah, I don't know anything about you. So the reason why you're here, which I think is an interesting one, is Richard very kindly reached out to me and said that he liked the podcast and it was a brave subject to approach. And your words to me were, you were so surprised at how open people had been.
Yeah.
So am I. So am I. And I think that's why I'm really pleased as to how the podcast has gone. And I think it is helping people. We'll see. So then I said to Richard, if you know of anyone that would want to come on and tell their story. And Richard said, you can do a whole series on me. And you proceeded to then tell me all of the kind of grief you've been through. Yeah. So then I said to Richard, well, if you ever fancy coming on, let me know. To which then there was your mild hesitation because you're a man, you're of an older generation, we discussed.
I don't rub it in.
You're all right. He's older than me anyway.
Yeah.
But a male and older generation and staunchly British.
Yeah.
So one does not discuss one's feelings.
Stiff upper lip and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But then you came back to me.
Yeah, I think probably the reason for that, Katie, is that I thought, well, if one single person who listens to this can take something from it, well, that's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you're right. I come from a generation where you just didn't talk about it, to be honest with you. And, maybe a psychiatrist or a trick cyclist of some description would have a field day, and would tell me why I do certain things in the way that I do them was because I didn't talk about something 50 years ago. I've got no idea. I managed to keep the drinks industry going. Well, maybe that's part of it. Who knows?
It's a very English part of it as well.
Well, whenever there's a problem, the first thing a British person does is go down the pub, isn't it?
Or make a cup of tea.
That's true, yeah.
Which is, we have had a couple.
In these enlightened times, we should say a cup of tea, shouldn't we?
Oh, yeah, that's true. In fact, that was the first thing we did. I opened the door to Richard and I was like, I've just stuck the kettle on. Everyone gets very excited. I'm going to move your microphone down a little bit.
Okay.
because Richard's very relaxed like me. I like it, especially on the sofa.
Yeah.
You did say it was like a therapist couch.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that goes with the conversation then.
We will see. And that, I think that's one of the reasons, like, I have a studio here in my house, and there's, you know, another sort of kitchen worktop, and I did think about that when it came to the podcast, because I was like, no, I do want it to be relaxed. I mean, you're very relaxed.
Yeah.
And I think that then leads people into this false sense of security, and they just keep talking.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be that. I think that, you know, if they're feeling comfortable in an environment where they want to talk about such things, then not necessarily for your own personal gratification, but if it can help somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, because once you've been, you know yourself, once you've been through these things, you have your own way of coming to terms with it. And I won't say you ever get over it, because I don't think you ever do, but you learn to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you know that, you know, the sun comes up eventually, and, well, not eventually, every 24 hours. But, you know, things do improve.
Yeah.
And they do get better, and you just have to, you know, I mean, the oldest thing about life is death, isn't it?
I know. And it is a strange one, whereby, and that was, we spoke about the reason why I started the podcast, was because how there's no right or wrong way. And I know I keep saying it, and it's the intro to the podcast as well. And that's kind of what I wanted to get across, because I think so many people think they have to grieve in a certain way.
Yeah.
And the episode 10 with Dominique, that was the first episode I had where she grieved someone who was still alive. Ambiguous grief, which I even had to educate myself. I knew that was a thing. I didn't know it had a name. And there is so many other things that we grieve. We just don't kind of think about it. And then because it's not death, we feel that we don't have a right to grieve.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
It's a very strange one. So anyway, here we are. So I guess I know that you have suffered a lot of grief, and you're willing to talk about it, and that's why you're here. So I guess start off with your brother. Yeah. It was, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. He was the oldest of, I'm one of four. He was the eldest. And then there's my elder sister who lives in America, myself, and then my younger sister who lives in Germany. It was, let me think, 1970, something like that, 1969, 1970. Just to set the scene a little bit, he would have been 4 years older than me, I think. No, that can't be right. 7 years older than me.
Okay.
And he was away at school. He was a weekly boarder at a school in Norwich. So you'd go off on a Monday morning, come back on a Friday evening. Oh, wow. Now, the reason for me telling you the relevance of that is that, you know, we were close, but not every day close. And then he left there and went to university, or technical college, I think it was called in those days, to become a borough surveyor for the local council. So he was involved in civil engineering project. And it's funny, there are certain snippets of these things you can vividly remember, but actually they've probably been warped over time. Yeah. Probably.
I make stuff up all the time.
Yeah, convince yourself that you're right. One, not you specifically. But we all knew anything was going on. And bearing in mind I'm 13 at the time, so I'm, you know, life is playing other tricks with puberty kicking in and that sort of thing. I remember watching him go out to play football, and he headed a ball and his neck stuck at an angle, which was a bit weird. Anyway, they took him to hospital and one thing. No, I missed that a bit. Right, got that a bit wrong. He collapsed at home that night and was rushed into hospital. And
after the football match.
After the football match, and they were busy. And bearing in mind, this is 50 years ago, and medical science has changed dramatically for the better. And cut a long story short, it was nothing to do with heading the ball. It's just that he had a fluid around some organs in the neck. It was a form of leukemia. And I can remember it was April the 13th because it was my best mate's birthday. Oh no! So you know how these things start. Yeah, he couldn't treat it in the hospital in Lowestoft. He was transferred to St Thomas's in London. Okay. And things seemed to be going okay. Although in hindsight, I wonder whether they were. I don't know. But we were all taken up to see him because Mum and Dad were in London, obviously at the time. Which I guess maybe our parents doing it as a final goodbye. I really don't know. I was too young to know. And then transferred to Maida Vale, and he died there on June the 8th. So it was very quick.
Well, you say it's quick, but April the 13th to June the 8th, that's a long time, because we would have been in hospital that whole time.
Yeah.
Quick in terms of leukemia, but when it's, from what you're saying, he was absolutely fine until this football match, as it were.
Yeah.
That's because you didn't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there must have been something prior to that no one would have spotted it. You know, I mean, today perhaps with regular medical checks, then perhaps people might have spotted something. I mean, who knows? But it was fairly devastating.
I was going to say,
family.
How did it affect, if you can remember? But how on earth did that affect you as a big brother and at that formative age you were?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's difficult to say because I had experienced grief before that because my maternal grandfather had died 4 years before that.
Okay.
So you'd sort of see my mother upset around the house and that sort of thing. You don't really connect the dots at that age, particularly. But this is an interesting point because it does link straight the way back to what you're talking about the stiff upper lip thing. You've got to remember that was only, math's going to be really embarrassing, 25 years after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And if you go back 25 years ago from where we are now,
Yeah.
that puts us where? In the middle of the 90s, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that seems like yesterday to me.
Yeah.
So to my grandmother, who was looking after us, the Second World War, when everybody was losing people left, right and centre, obviously, and another maiden aunt who was looking after us. Now, there's another thing. You don't see maiden aunts anymore, do you?
I was just about to say, I don't even know what that is.
Do you not know?
Not a clue.
Oh, there you
go.
go.
Maiden aunt.
It's literally an aunt that hasn't married, a spinster, if you like. A maiden aunt. And when I was a child, there were loads of maiden aunts.
I was one of them for ages. No one called me that.
It's a bit derogatory now, but it was sort of those, obviously during the First World War, so many men were killed. There were lots of spare women. That doesn't sound very nice.
No, but I know what you mean.
A
maiden aunt.
They were known as maiden aunts, yeah. And I had a maiden aunt whose, I'm not sure it was a fiance, it might have been fiance, was gassed in the trenches in the First World War, and she never got married. Right, so, and I think this is where I'm leading up to. You were sort of almost taught, well, you've got no right to be upset because far worse has happened to other people.
Yeah.
I knew my friends of the family had, I can't remember if it was the Second World War or the First World War, but we were told, that there was close family friends who had lost 4 sons in the war. Now, losing 1 is bad enough, losing 4 is intolerable.
Yeah, of course.
So I think there was this, big boys don't cry thing.
Yeah.
Just get on with it.
Yeah.
Get on with it, and that was that. And I suppose it would be for others to judge whether I was off the rails or not. Arguably, I've always been off the rails, but I've enjoyed. The paradox is, and this is something I guess will come out a bit more later, is that I've always tried to see the brighter side of life and to enjoy life. Mm-hmm. Jethro says, enjoy every day as if it's your last, because one day you'll be bloody right.
We always refer to these really old stand-up comedians.
I know.
Jethro, look him up.
Well, yeah.
He's brilliant.
Yeah, look him up. Go on,
I spoke about
now.
Dave Allen.
Dave Allen with his thing, whatever it was, half a finger, wasn't
Yeah.
it? It was that one, wasn't it? Yeah, I think so.
It's not full Jeremy Beadle, half hand, was it?
No, it was just that bit of finger was missing, wasn't it? I think.
So do you? Sorry to interrupt. Do you remember people saying that to you you were 13, 14?
Definitely.
Really?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Big boys don't cry. To be fair, my grandmother said you just got to cry, get it out of your system, and then bloody well get on with it. Get on the horse again. And she was a formidable woman. She never knew her father, for example. He died before she was born. And they were the standards of the time.
Yeah.
They really were. And they'd lived through the austerity of pre-Second World War, and I think we talked about families and links and so on. She could remember talking to her grandmother, who had talked to her grandmother.
Right.
So that's spanning 250 years.
Yeah.
Describing in great detail how they sat around in black once the husband had died and that sort of thing. And she remembered the austerity of the end of the Napoleonic War, for example. 250 years before. So nothing has really changed. People mourning losses of sons and so on and so forth. I'm not, not excusing it or anything like that. It was the way of the world at that time. And
you're not going to be some kind of trailblazer and be like, no, I want to cry.
No, at the time I was very interested in playing rugby. I played a lot of rugby.
Okay.
and the thought of being the fat, wheezy boy sobbing at the edge of the pitch didn't quite fit with my image, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So you just kind of brush yourself off and get on with it. But that's not to say you don't grieve. You do grieve in some shape or form. How it manifested itself in me, probably you'd need to ask my elder sister that one.
I was going to say, so were you the youngest of the four?
No. I had a younger sister as well.
Right.
So I was number 3 in...
Fine. So how old was your... Sorry, I don't even know the name of your brother who died.
Oh, Christopher.
And then who was next?
Jill.
And she was how many years older than you?
3 years, I think, or 2 years.
And then you, and then who's under you?
Liz. She's 6 years younger than me.
6 years younger. Oh, that's quite a span.
Oh, yeah.
Between the four of you.
Yeah.
So that was what I was going to ask, bearing in mind the relationship I have with my siblings surrounding death. How did you pack together? What was...
Well, it's easier to talk about Liz, the younger one, because she was so young. She would have been 6, I suppose. Here's an interesting point. We never discussed it.
No, really?
Never discussed it.
Never?
No, never been discussed. And that theme will come back again, because I know where the conversation might go after this. That theme will come back again, because you just don't. The stupidity of the situation would have been at the time, well, what is there to discuss? Because in those days, we didn't talk about how you feel. It was, get back on the horse.
That's... I totally understand it, because I understand from that period of time, but it just blows my mind to even think about that.
Yeah, but they were different times, a long time ago, 50 years ago.
Totally get it.
But it's funny how there are moments that are frozen in time. I can recall, this is really bizarre, I can recall driving around Marble Arch to park in the car park there, and my father's I wasn't driving, obviously, I was 13, but father's Austin Maxi, which is blue. And a song came on called Hurricane Smith.
Okay.
Don't Let It Die. Well, how prophetic is that?
Okay.
And it was talking about the end of a relationship, I think. You remember that? And then I remember distinctly when the call came through, we were watching a comedy programme on television, and it was one of these sort of classic 1970s sitcom things, and they'd built a boat inside a house, but they couldn't get it out because the window wasn't big enough. So we were roaring our heads off. The phone rings just to tell us that our brother had died. And that is like a photographic memory. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you much more. I remember the funeral. The church was packed, 600-700 people.
Wow.
Because what we didn't say, we talked about the Overy family, is they were really big in Lowestoft in terms of society, and we talked about the various organisations they're involved in. So the family were very entwined with...
And that's where you were brought up? That's where you
Lowestoft,
right.
yeah, where the aforementioned Daniel
yes.
Had his business, which subsequently William, my line, took over. And yours, I think, he became sounds awful, you can't say this now, a smack dealer, which is, a smack is a fishing vessel.
Oh, right.
Fishing smack, yeah, I know. Fame at last. My cramp.
Oh, no, you're right.
Yeah.
My family line was smack dealers.
Yeah.
That's not something I ever thought I would say.
And antique dealers as well.
Okay.
But I don't know why, it's in the notes somewhere. I'll eventually write a book about it, and then no one will read it. That's
fascinating.
Yeah.
Actually, very quickly talking about our family line, we're going to dip in and out of this.
Yeah.
As you know from listening to the podcast, I tend to make stuff up. There are stories that I think are true, and I regale these stories to then only find out that they're not true.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to. I genuinely do not mean to lie. I just think that I know these things. So I have always told the story that there was an Overy on a female convict ship to Australia.
That's almost certain, yes.
Oh.
Yeah,
right, and that would have come from you, because you met my dad and you discussed the royal ancestry.
Yeah.
So I haven't made that up.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Because there's lots of Overys in Australia, isn't there?
Well, I've got a cousin out there.
Oh, okay.
Who's Colin William. He's... Yeah, I don't think he's a smack dealer, though. I think I might have heard of you.
I want to use that now from now on. And just I can imagine being arrested and go, but I'm a smack dealer.
Yeah, exactly.
This is totally fine.
Yeah.
Going back to... What is it? A fishing vessel?
Fishing smack, yeah.
A fishing smack. Okay, fine. Going back to Christopher, I'm very interested to understand, again, because of the times, how was your dad and how was your mum and dad about it?
Oh, inconsolable or unconsolable, whichever the word is.
And in turn toward you and your siblings?
Well, perversely, again, you'd have to ask my sisters this question, which is unlikely because they're not here, but I actually think there's a degree of jealousy over a lost sibling because all the attention was going to the, I don't know how you say this, but to the lost sibling, as it were.
Yeah.
And I think we were jockeying for position and that sort of thing and the love and attention of the parents.
Right.
But my father, it affected him very badly because he, just to place this, he was in the RAF in India and Burma during the Second World War.
Okay.
And that's the link back to that other Bill who was also in the Air Force.
Not Canadian Bill.
Yeah, Canadian Bill. Canadian Bill, yeah.
We've already discussed Bill Overys that we know and don't know.
They weren't very imaginative in the Overy family. Everybody was a William or a George or a Geoffrey. Perhaps that's all they could spell. So, yes, he was in India, but whilst he was in India, he played a lot of football.
Okay.
And he was the sort of medic as well, as it were. And he basically told my brother, just get on with it. You know, you only hurt your neck, for Christ's sake. You haven't broken it or anything. And I think he carried that guilt with him.
Oh, really?
For a while,
Yeah.
Well, for a long time, because the next sequence of events probably highlights that. And my mother, well, she was a very stoic woman. She would have been a contemporary of Margaret Thatcher's had she gone to university.
Wow.
She was a very, very, very bright woman. Won a scholarship to, I'll get this wrong way around, Oxford, I think it was. But her father wouldn't let her go. He was a fish merchant.
Smack dealer.
Yeah, I think he might have smacked a few fish, but he was. There is a reason. This is relevant. He was seconded down to run the food supplies in Devon and Cornwall during the Second World War. Okay. For pre-landing of D-Day and stuff like that. Yeah. And he didn't think it was a woman's place to go to university. I know.
Gosh,
I know.
And this is only 50 years ago. Well,
it'd be more than that. It'd be 65 years ago, something like that. You know, but so she was very, very tough woman. I mean, not nasty tough, but very resilient. Yeah. Very, very resilient, you know, and she would know anything about anything, you know, and I shouldn't say she was fluent in French, but she was very good at French, knew her Latin and Greek and stuff very well. So, so she was sort of resilient through it, and obviously there'd be times when she'd have a meltdown that would be very unusual if she didn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they were broken-hearted as any parent would be who'd lost a firstborn.
Of course.
And as a parent myself, I just can't imagine how you would feel through that. I really can't.
Yeah, you never outlive your children. How were they toward you and your siblings? Like, were they loving? Were they the ones also saying you've got to get on with it?
Do you know? I really can't recall.
No.
I think my father threw himself into things like the local Amdram Society, not on the stage but behind the scenes, and things like the swimming club and the Scouts. You know, he would be sort of, I don't know, chairman and that sort of thing of various things. So he was out a lot, and perhaps in hindsight their marriage started to. They didn't divorce, but maybe their marriage started to disintegrate as a result. And you do see this quite a lot when a child dies. The parents drift apart, and that's, I guess, part of the grief process. I don't know, but it's hard to recall because at that age, 13, 14, I was into playing rugby 2 or 3 times a week and keeping fit. Says you now, fatty, you know, and just trying to create my own life such that it was. School was a bit of a breeze for me. You know, I kind of enjoyed myself and had a laugh, you know, and what have you. Those are the bits I remember. Other people may remember it differently of how I was at that time, you know. So
please feel free to email in if you disagree with Richard's academic performance.
Yeah, I know. I did have the wonderful experience of being locked in an art cupboard because I was messing around in art all the time. So
Oh no!
well, see, maybe that's a reaction, perhaps. I got detention a few times.
Yeah, so you might have.
I've been a bit rebellious.
For sure. Yeah. Did you find yourself protective? Because now you were the only boy, as it were, although you were in the middle.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself protective over Liz and I've totally forgotten her name. Jill. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
No, I got the nickname Cinderella. They're two ugly sisters.
Oh, right, okay, fine.
You knew that was coming, didn't you?
Yeah, dad joke. I wouldn't expect anything less.
Did I feel protective? No, not really. That came a bit later. I think, if anything, it drove us apart.
Oh, right.
Again, you'd have to ask them that, and if they see this, they'll probably phone me up and say, "What on earth are you talking about? You got it all wrong." But I'm only seeing it through my eyes.
Absolutely, and you're allowed to tell your story. Yeah.
I think they drove us apart in the sense it made us more independent. It certainly made me the independent person that I am today. Well, I question of that. Whether it had the same effect on them, only they can say, really.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So, you don't remember whether there was any, standout moments that you can then directly link to, obviously, the loss of Christopher?
Oh, I see where you're going with the question. So, well, yeah, I can. There are a couple of things, actually, which, being a mature person, that I am now, that I can recall that stopped me in my tracks. One was when I would have been, 16, 17, started to grow a beard.
Okay.
Christopher had a beard when he died.
Right.
And my mother just launched into me, saying, remind me of your older brother. And I'm like, what? I'm only growing a beard. Things like, but I can understand those triggers. She had a low moment then or whatever, and there were one or two things like that. And to be fair to my older sister, she did stand up for me at the time.
Oh, right.
Which is unusual because I spent most of my time taking the Mickey out of her.
I can bleep. I've had a lot worse on here, so you're fine.
Like siblings will argue amongst each other. And
for sure. Did you keep the beard?
No, I didn't. No, it looked a bit like something the cat could have licked off, but a bit wispy.
You tried your hardest.
I tried my hardest. Yeah. Good blast of eastern wind, and that had disappeared.
Okay, so the beard went, and then moving forward, you've already mentioned about perhaps your parents. Again, back in those days, they certainly didn't get divorced, but you could sense that they were drifting apart, and it affected their marriage.
Maybe I see it more with hindsight than I do experience at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
But it seemed to me that they had less in common. Is probably a strange way I put it, because there's still the three of us. But and I'm just thinking of a sequence of events. Jill, by that time, would have probably have gone off to teach at training college.
Okay.
Or university, whichever it was. So again, that left me and Liz, and because there was 6 years between us, that's quite a big gap, I do think my parents lost one between the two of us, but then I would have known that, so it's not something you can grieve over.
No,
and it was fairly common, in those days, as it is today, of course. So there's nothing I can really put my finger on other than hindsight. You think, well, probably that was what was happening. And not unsurprising of them moving apart a bit.
Yeah, of course. And then fast forwarding to then your parents they remained together, and then your father passed away when you were relatively young as well.
Yeah, 1980, so only 10 years after Christopher died.
Okay.
And some in the family would have said he died of a broken heart, and I can actually believe that. Things were never the same after that.
Right, of course.
And who knows that sort of trauma that plays out. And there, of course, had there been counselling, perhaps things might have been different. But he was 57 when he died, so 6 years younger than I am now. And that was quite interesting. Isn't quite the right word, but he had been ill a couple of days, I think, with I can't think what it is called now. But anyway, he just being sick, he what's it called? Gallbladder.
Oh.
Gallbladder.
Okay.
And I remember cycling one lunchtime from where I was working. It was a 4-mile round trip. Classic late 70s suit, a woolen brown pinstripe suit on.
Sexy.
God, I know. Flares that
I was going to say, was it flares?
Yeah. where they would have come around the corner before you did because they were so big.
They're back in this year, Richard.
I know. I haven't chucked mine out, so I'll be fine.
Please don't wear them anymore. Heels, little heels.
Cubans, yeah.
Little Cubans.
Oh, yeah, the stacks they were called, yeah.
Yes, that's right. Only because I've got quite a few pictures of my dad. He was best man for like everyone, I think. And I've got the pictures. I'll share them with you afterwards. And that is literally it, these Cuban heels.
Yeah, and collars with round collars and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, collars that you could like land a plane on. Like these lapels were huge. Okay, so they
surrounded by butterflies because they had loads of flowers on them. Yeah. So yeah, he had been ill, and then.
So you're on your bike, you said.
Yeah, I went up to see him, and this and the other, and just see him really, and then went back. And the next morning, the phone rang, and my mother said, "I just found your father dead in bed, massive heart attack, just like that, gone, 57."
At 57, he was a relatively healthy man.
Not by today's standards, no.
Right.
No. You know, again, it's a generational thing. I was having this conversation the other week. We were reasonably middle class in the sense that we had a nice house and all the rest of it, and things did fall apart after brother died. But if it didn't grow in the garden, or you didn't rear it, then you didn't eat it.
Right. Okay.
And that's not to say we didn't go to the shops. Of course we did, but you know, it's healthy in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But some bizarre things that I came to mind a couple of months ago when I was talking to someone else. My father has really strange eating habits. Things like chitlings and chips. You wouldn't know. You know what chitlings and chips?
Oh yeah. Okay. Bread and dripping.
Yeah, bread and dripping. Yeah, absolutely. And lettuce with sugar. Lettuce sandwiches with sugar on them.
What?
I know. Bizarre, isn't it? Bizarre.
Hang on. But slices of bread, a slice of bread, buttered, lettuce, sugar, slice of bread.
Yeah. I couldn't think of anything worse, you know. So in terms of healthy lifestyle, no. You know, again, we live in more enlightened times. We know what we should and shouldn't be eating by and large, and exercise is key thing, of course. Can
you, for anyone that's listening, can you please explain what bread and dripping is? It sounds obvious.
It's beef fat, basically. You know, literally the dripping that comes off the joint of meat.
When you roast it.
And it goes in a sort of coagulated lump of fat that you just spread on you.
You'd spread it on bread.
I know.
Bread and dripping. I did have it once. I mean, it was certainly not of my generation. But I had it once, and I always, both my mum and my dad, it's absolutely amazing. It's amazing.
Well, the origin of that is similar, I think I'm right in saying, is the origin of Yorkshire pudding, is that you would roast a joint of, in this case, beef, let's say, and then you'd let the fat drip through onto a Yorkshire pudding, which the kids would then eat.
That sounds nice.
Yeah, that I get, actually. But this is coagulated fat, and you know, after a period of time, that obviously builds up in the arteries. And
slightly. Yeah, it does slightly. I speak about this podcast a lot, actually, as friends of mine, Brett and Cliff's Flea Circus. And they're two guys from South Shields, my age. And actually on their podcast this week, they were discussing what's the best thing you could put in 2 slices of bread. Right. And Brett's wife puts pizza in a sandwich and dips it in vinegar, which is
bizarre.
Yeah, South Shields. And then, but then weirdly, Cliff, he has pie. Like a pie sandwich.
Really?
Which then to me is odd because that you've already got a crust.
I know.
Well, and a crisp sandwich. Would you have a crisp sandwich?
No, I'm averse. I don't like crisps. I'm one of the few people in this world that don't like crisps.
See, Richard, I know we're family, but that doesn't mean we have to be friends.
No, I know. I've just been exposed.
What would you have in a sandwich?
I
love a ham sandwich.
Yeah, ham sandwich is lovely. My favourite, I think, is slightly raw beef in a sandwich.
Oh yeah,
you know,
bit of horseradish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. That would be mine.
It's coming up to lunchtime.
Yeah.
Anyway, so okay, relatively healthy. Going back to your dead dad.
Yeah.
As we've diversed somewhat.
Yeah.
So besides the lettuce and sugar sandwiches.
Yeah.
He was, you know, as you say, you were middle class. You had a relatively healthy lifestyle. But did he smoke? Was it anything like that?
Oh yeah, he did smoke. Had smoked.
Okay.
He gave that up. I can't remember when he gave it up, but I think it was might have been after Christopher died. I can't remember now, but he was a 60 a day, senior service untipped, which is what everybody smoked in those days.
Right. So not relatively healthy then.
No. I mean, I should explain that better. Relatively healthy for the period of the time, but not by today's standards.
Of course, yeah.
Now, I've never smoked. and I can never work out whether I should suck or blow properly. No?
Yeah.
Yes,
this is a PG.
Yes,
podcast.
I know.
Family podcast, Richard.
I ended up coughing. I just couldn't do it. I'm glad I didn't, because playing a lot of rugby and stuff and keeping relatively fit.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been conducive.
So that was a huge loss only 10 years after a huge loss in your family.
Yeah.
How did it affect you, and how did it affect your mum? If you can remember.
I can remember. For me, almost selfishly, it propelled me into... I was married by that time. Into being the carer, for want of a better word, for my mother, my grandmother, the aforementioned maiden aunt.
Okay.
And there were other male members around, but most of my weekends were spent dodging around, changing light bulbs and lifting heavy shopping and a bit of gardening that needed doing and all that sort of stuff.
And emotionally, did you become like a patriarch of the family?
I suppose I probably did. I mean, I was only young, 23, was that? 23, 22, 23.
You were already married?
Yeah, I mean, in those days, we were all married young. That's another story. But things were different then, of course. So I think I probably resented it more than anything else. I was probably angry that he died so young, leaving me in this position. Probably... I don't know. I suppose... I mean, there are some really bizarre things that you remember. I remember charging around the house, and for some reason I got my foot stuck under the brake in the car. Couldn't brake the car in time and skidded right the way down the long drive that we had. Nearly went to a bloody great... Stop swearing. Nearly went into a great big lilac tree. I mean, that's totally irrelevant to the story.
No, I know.
But it stays in your mind.
Yeah.
Really bizarre.
Yeah.
Really, really bizarre. Oh, and there was another thing that came out of that, which was, again, totally bizarre, is that, and we talk about how the media today reacts to such things, he was a fairly well known in the town, from the family, was well known, of course. And some reason the ambulance was a bit late getting there. My mother dialed 999.
Okay.
Right? And some politician tried to put two and two together and said there were some cutbacks in local funding, and was this the reason why my father had died. And that got into the local papers because he was, I won't say he's a celebrity, but a well-known person.
Yeah.
And that really upset the family more than really well, not more than the fact that he died, but that was a really brutal thing to happen. Because I remember having to phone up the doctors on my mother's behalf, who we kind of knew as family friends, which people did in those days, and apologising to them and said, "Look, it's not us who said this, it's this idiot of a politician."
Yeah. And without your kind of family
I know,
consent,
I know. And in the end, you assume the crown, if you like. The king is dead, long live the king. You're the 23-year-old with ideas of grandeur. I ended up phoning the journalist who reported it and the politician or local council, whatever they were, and having a go at them.
Yeah.
It made me feel better,
That's fair enough. Did anything happen? Did they recant anything? Was there any apologies?
I don't really remember, to be honest with you. I got it off my chest. Made me feel better.
Yeah, exactly. But that's so bizarre. And I mean, it's the press, isn't it? I mean, how insensitive can they be? I mean, we know.
But at a time like that, yeah. I mean, and nothing's new, is it? So today we'd be moaning about social media doing things. Well, actually, it was going on then in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I mean, they just want a story, don't they? At the end of the day.
Yeah.
Were you close to your dad?
Fairly. And again, bearing in mind this is now 40 years ago. So, can I remember the sound of his voice? Probably not. No.
Really?
Probably not. No. Obviously, I know what he looks like because I've got photographs, but memory does fade. But now, I'll tell you something else, and it must have affected me more than I thought because, well, I would have done, but at that time, I was living in Alton Broad, which is on the outside of Lowestoft, and I used to walk into work, which is about a mile. It gave me that sort of breathing space, if you want. He died in the March, and I remember in my own head chronicling flowers coming up at different times in the spring.
Okay.
I remember looking, and it sounds very prosaic, but it's true. I remember looking at a daffodil, and a daffodil's come through, and then the tulips come after that, and then I may have got this in the wrong sequence actually, and then the almond trees would come out and the cherry trees would come out, and thinking you'd never see this again. And that's another thing is saying, well, you've got to use every day to an advantage. You get a choice. You can wake up in the morning, you can either go and suck your thumb and cry under the pillows, or you can get up and do something.
Yeah.
And then I had this most perverse thought. I thought, just imagine being a daffodil bulb. You're saying to your mate, every bloody year, I'm a daffodil bulb. I really want to try out being a tulip for a year. Oh, spring, here we go again. Oh, Christ, I'm a daffodil. I thought, no, that might say more about my mental state than it does about...
It's such a great analogy.
Well, it is weird, isn't it? I mean, could you imagine the boredom of being a daffodil? Here we go again. Oh, Christ, it's daffodil.
I must admit, Richard, I've never thought about it. I may do now. But yeah, you're right. How interesting.
Yeah.
And isn't that weird that again has stuck in your mind that you remember?
I know. It's funny, isn't it, really? And to this day, I do enjoy the colours of spring.
Yeah.
And it is, people talk about, and particularly in this part of the world, the rising of the sun as an opportunity. And it is. Every day is a new day, a starter. And I think in hindsight, that got me through a lot of it without unwittingly knowing it. I mean, even now, I'll be the first to get up and embrace the day. Because carpe diem, you've got no choice, really.
Yeah, and we touch on that a lot.
Yeah.
The whole... I don't know if you can just hear that noise, but that's my cat fighting with another cat outside. Poppy's very popular on the podcast. I have a picture up in my bedroom. Life's too short to be unhappy.
Yeah.
And I always remember, it's not all about carpe diem and seize the day, and it wasn't this real like eureka moment almost when my parents died in very close proximity to each other, not geographically, time wise. Be weird if it was geographically, but I certainly don't preach it, or I try not to preach it, but exactly as you said, just you kind of have a choice, and you are here for other people as well. You've got children and grandchildren and what have you, and even for your own sanity. That's
absolutely right. And I think that people talk about throwing yourself into a project and that sort of thing. In fact, actually, that was part of the reason why I started genealogy looking back, because I was on a sort of management training route, if you like, within the organisation, did psychometric testing, which was an earlier form of it. And the woman that tested me, after she said I had inappropriate humour, which you experienced...
no wonder we're related.
I know. Said, you need something other than work to indulge your inquisitive brain. Try writing a book. Well, I'm not going to do that. Well, I might do.
But you are writing a book, aren't you?
Well, I might do. I might finish it off. We'll see one day. But that was when I sort of pushed into the genealogy thing of working out where we come from and all the rest of it. And of course, with genealogy, it's not everybody's cup of tea. I fully accept that. But it's like a never-ending story because it takes you all over the place.
Yeah.
All over the place. In fact, there is a really weird story that just recalled when another family member on a different side of the family was effectively required care at home.
Okay.
And Macmillan nurses were there.
Long live Macmillan nurses.
Yes, hats off to them. My wallet fell out of my jacket, which was on the back of the chair when I was around there visiting. And the nurse picked it up and she opened it. Oh, she said, I'll just check who this is. Overy, she said, that's strange. She said, that's my maiden name. And actually, it would have been a closer relative to you than I am.
Okay.
I don't know whether she's still around or not now or not, but that would have been about 20 years ago. Yeah, it's strange, isn't it?
That is...
Strange quirks.
Yeah, really strange.
Lived in the same town, didn't even know her.
And it is strange because, so my dad... So Stephen Jeffrey Overy, he was an only child, as I know you know.
Yeah.
And then on my mum's side, she's got one sister, Auntie Jane. Love you, Auntie Jane. I know you listen. But we don't have anything else now. So it's me, it's Russell and I, and now Russell's two boys. Thankfully, with these male heirs to the Overy name, but
an heir and a spare.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's like it's so interesting, and I'm so grateful that I've now met you and know you better, because I actually don't know anything else, and it's a really weird thing. And if you're listening, like, ask your parents and your grandparents loads of questions.
Yeah.
I don't, because now I don't know, and I can never find out. I only know, for example, the story of when my mum and dad meeting, right? Both parents, grandparents lived in Cardington Square in Hounslow, and my memory is that my dad said he was driving along in his Hillman Imp and saw my mum's legs first. My mum had legs up to her armpits. But that could also be a story that I've sort of, embellished over the years. Yeah. I'd love to know if that was actually. Do you know what I mean? I know it sounds weird.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because
I've kind of gone off on one there, but
yeah, I mean, I know this isn't a genealogy podcast, but often you'll hear genealogists, certainly amateur ones, say that most family stories are true.
Okay.
Most family stories are true.
Okay.
And when you think about it, the ancient tribes would have handed down stories.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them you can't believe, obviously, about the god of thunder. Well, we know there isn't a god of thunder.
I'll tell you. Isn't that Thor? That's Thor on the Greek side, isn't it? Who is it on the Roman side?
I can't remember now, to be honest. I should know. I'll be embarrassed.
You carry on, I'm going to Google it.
But most family stories are right. And the one I'm following up when I ever get around to doing it, unfortunately not on the Overy side, it's on a different side.
Right, okay.
We're supposed to have got a line back to Isaac Newton.
Really?
Yeah, but I find it hard to believe because he didn't have any kids. So it must have been one of his siblings that we're related to.
Right, okay.
But, yeah.
Mars is the Roman god of war.
Of course it is, yeah. Of course it is. And I like all of his chocolate.
Yeah, great planet.
Yeah, exactly. So where was I going with that?
Family stories being true.
Family stories being true. And so anecdotally, stuff that you will have remembered perhaps from your parents, or let's say our joint lineage, if you like, would be true almost certainly. But proving them is difficult.
Yeah,
impossible.
Yeah.
You can only do it by what's recorded. There's a lot more stuff being digitized, which you can qualify some of these things with.
Yeah. No, I find it fascinating, and I know we've just gone off on a massive tangent, but that's fine. So we were still talking about your dad. I'm sorry, what was your dad's name?
Jack.
Jack. Okay, fine.
Well, actually, his name was John, but he's called Jack.
Yeah.
My uncle's name was Arthur, but he's called Bill. Why
was that a thing in that generation?
Don't know. I have no idea. No idea at all. In fact, actually, tragedy has touched our line quite a lot. They had an older sister who died giving birth.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So.
There's death and there's tragedy and trauma.
Oh yeah, there is. But then you learn to. Again, there's always someone much worse off than you are. Is the way of the view of it.
Which we will touch on that later, because of course, with our wonderful coronavirus pandemic that we're in at the moment, there is a sense of having to say that to some people, especially as we live in Dubai and we've got wonderful comforts, but that's not always the best thing to say, as we know. No. It does give us sort of like, okay, fine, but don't beat you mustn't beat yourself up. You are allowed to not have your sadness and your grief.
Yeah, it's a personal thing.
Yeah,
very much personal thing.
People would say this to me. And I remember this vividly after my dad died, my best friend Sam. I remember we were chatting on the phone. I was in England at the time because I stayed there for about 3 months. And she'd had her firstborn, and she was saying, she stayed up all night, or she's not eating, or she's not breastfeeding, or something or other. And then all of a sudden she stopped and she said, "I'm so sorry. You've just lost your dad. Like this pales into insignificance." I said, "But it's important to you, and it's upsetting you." So I just remember that.
Well, that's an interesting point, because you've just taken me back to after my father died. People would come around the house and we'd make endless cups of bloody tea and coffee and all that. I'm swearing again, sorry. Endless cups of tea and coffee. And people would stand and look at you, and I think, you don't really know what to say, do you? So I'm starting to make the conversation to make them feel more at ease. And, people who haven't experienced grief, who ask me what they think they should say, so just be normal. Just say, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Is there anything I can do?" or whatever it might be. And I think the fact that people are just thinking about you does mean a lot.
Yeah.
It does mean a lot. I'm not talking necessarily about going and running the shopping or whatever else it might be. He just knows someone there at the end of a phone, having a bad day, and you must have come across this as well. So many people talk about Grief is like waves crashing on a beach.
Okay.
There'll be lots of small ones, and all of a sudden this breaker comes from somewhere. You can't define where it's come from or why, and all of a sudden you think, God, it really is real. And then it goes back down again, and over time those waves get smaller and smaller, and they never disappear, but they do get smaller.
How did you grieve your dad? Do you remember grieving him?
I think this is similar to something that Russ said, is that because you end up being the boss man of the family, you just get thrown into all the paperwork, and that's quite cathartic. Same
as what Russ was saying.
It really is. You sort everything out, and then you've got a mission and a purpose, and it keeps you away from the hearts and flowers and deciding which hymns you're going to have at the service. And they're all important things, but I don't think I don't recall being part of that. That was
right
for the girls and mum to sort out. And then there were all traditional ones that sung at every family funeral. You think, oh.
All Things Bright and Beautiful? No.
Wouldn't have
been that, would it?
No, that's no. It doesn't matter now. Abide with Me, I'm thinking of, and we've broken that cycle since. I think it's traditions in my view are nice, but they're also there to be broken.
Okay, that's an interesting.
It's the rebel in me coming out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but we've all got this hangover from the Victorians' way of dealing with death. A good example of this is, Katie, that. Not Daniel, but William. He had 2 wives because one of his wives died in childbirth as well.
So he's great grandfather.
Yeah, the brother of Geoffrey.
Fine.
And there's a huge monument in the Lowestoft Cemetery, because it's Victorian times he died. Just Edwardian, I think. And it's a very big thing with, harpsichord, broken string of a harp, I think, or whatever the Victorian saying was meant to be pining, not pining for the fields, but pining. Yeah. And it's lovely and all the rest of it, but no one goes. No one goes. Although I have to say, my oldest grandson Joshua, who's 9, is he? Yeah, soon to be 10. I think I got that right. I have to check my phone. He's taken interest in it.
Oh, okay.
And when my son goes back to Lowestoft, he's been to see the
monument.
So it carries on through the generations.
Yeah,
and that's quite nice. And I have been asked to document as much as I can recall. It was a bit difficult to do from here because all my stuff's in the UK. But I'm lost my train of thought there. Where were we going with that?
You were saying about that you were thrust into this.
Oh yeah, the big boy syndrome.
And you were saying about traditions and things like that. What about? Yeah. So if you thrust yourself into this paperwork, as it were, what are your memories of emotionally grieving?
The only one I can really recall, and again, anybody who's been through this, lost a close relative will know, it's the annual cycle. Birthdays, Christmas, I think Father's Day was the one that cracked me up, actually, the first year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just suddenly thought, I won't be buying a card this year.
Yeah.
But you get over it. And it's part of the natural process. I don't know that I actually did grieve deeply, and that one could argue that has manifested itself in my behaviour over the years. It could be. I'm certainly not risk averse. It's made me. What's the word? Maybe even reckless or feckless. I'm not sure.
Really? Yeah, you've touched a couple of times that you're a bit rebellious and a bit of a maverick in those.
With rugby, for example, I'd be always the first to go in head first into a scrum or something, and a number of times I got concussion and ended up in hospital.
Even after the thing with, I know it wasn't the football accident that
Do you know, I'd never linked the two there, but my poor parents had to come drag me out of hospital, and
that must have been tough.
Yeah.
But when I asked you earlier if you were close to your dad, was it a loving relationship? Again, I know generationally it was, my dad and Russell were loving. There was always kissing, cuddling. We were a very close family.
No,
it wasn't a loving relationship.
It was a Victorian, really. One of the phrases that I think is that, particularly boys when they go through puberty, you get to a certain stage where you're on nodding terms with Teddy. Right, Ted? Yeah, right, good. if you understand what I mean by that.
Yeah.
I think it's lovely nodding terms with Teddy. Right, mate? Yeah. And it was a bit like that. I don't think my father was. Let me think. He would have been 37 when I was born, I think.
Yeah.
So that's quite late.
Yeah.
Because of the war. He didn't come back from the war till he was 26, 27. He was one of the forgotten lot that came back about a year, 18 months after the war ended.
Right.
With Mountbatten stuff in Burma. And consequently of that, it was a bit staid by modern standards.
Yeah.
And to be fair, and I'm sure my kids will listen to this, they know I'm not tactile.
Right.
As a result, partly of that.
Yeah. I guess that's to be expected.
Yeah, it is. I'm more so with the grandchildren.
Okay.
Because it's different, but not really with my. I'm better than I was.
Okay.
Better than I was.
Okay.
So you break down these barriers as you get older, and.
Why do you think that is?
Why do you break down the barriers?
Yeah. Have you done that intentionally?
Mainly, people have said to me, "Oh, for God's sake, give him a hug" or something like that.
Really?
What? Me?
How interesting.
Yeah, it's partly, it is a generational thing, and an upbringing thing. It's quite Victorian in some of their. My parents were quite Victorian in some of their approaches.
Which is why I would love to ask my dad, because he clearly had a very different upbringing.
Yeah.
Because he was. I mean, he could not cuddle you enough. But same with my mum and my dad. And he was very tactile with all of his friends and family. So I'd love to know more about that, because I never knew. My dad's dad was Harold.
Yeah.
But his stepdad was Fred, because Harold died. I can't remember, or whether they got divorced. But anyway, my memories are, and Russell spoke about it, was that my dad's mum, Alice, Nana Alice, lived with her sister, Lillian.
A maiden aunt.
Well, yes. So Henry, her husband, they were married in March 1941. And he went down on the HMS Gloucester in May.
Oh, right.
In the May of the same year. So she never remarried, and she lived with Alice since the war, since 1941 or 42, whenever the HMS Gloucester went down.
Yeah.
So they were these two little old ladies. They were 5 foot nothing. And again, I'm describing it because, as Russell did the same thing, full face of makeup, like white powdered face, drawn on eyebrows. They used to have the little plastic bonnets, off down the co-op every day.
Yeah.
Sorry, and that's why I'd love to ask my dad then. I know that was a generational thing, but then why my dad was then a little different, I believe. He was so loving, so tactile.
Was it perhaps he was brought up in the company of more women?
Women as opposed to men, perhaps?
It would have been, I would think.
I don't know his relationship with his real dad or his stepdad.
I don't know either.
No, exactly, I know.
Well, I can't qualify this, but I have a picture, I think, of Harry.
Harold was his dad, right?
Yeah, with a fag hanging out of his mouth. Quite a rotund face.
Yes. Brill creamed to the nines.
Yeah. And I think I can vaguely recall your father saying he didn't get on with him very well.
Okay, yeah.
But don't take that as gospel.
No.
Because, the midst of times may well have warped my thinking on that. But then that's... Not everybody gets on with everybody, do they?
No, that's true. And then, do you know when you started to make this conscious effort of you trying to be more tactile with your children? Was it when the grandchildren came, for example?
I think it might have been probably after I got divorced.
Okay.
Probably. But again, my kids may think differently to that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll tell me if they think it's the case.
We'll get feedback on that.
Yeah. I can't recall, if I'm absolutely honest with you, because believe it or not, although I've been through these things, I don't actually, I'm talking about the deaths now, I do dwell on them at times, but I make a conscious effort not to. Because, life is for here and now, for the living. And who knows what tomorrow's going to bring.
But do you allow yourself to, or did you allow yourself to grieve at all, or did you just try and go, right, no, enough of that?
I suppose I quite enjoyed long walks on my own, usually ending up in a pub somewhere. And then the walk back was twice as long. And I found solace, I remember, in classical music.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that my brother had a collection of early Moody Blues stuff.
Nice.
And that's really one step away from classical music. You know, purists may argue not, but to me it was an entree that getting into classical music. And we'd been brought up in a religious family, which I used to bore the pants off me going to church every Sunday. But so I knew most of the hymns off by heart. But the organ music quite attracted me, you know. And occasionally we go to what would have been called high church.
Okay.
Which was, well, more classical music to a child than you'd really want to hear. But some of it stuck with me. Now I took some comfort in that as I got older, listening to classical music, and I think it helps me detach myself from where I am at that particular moment in time.
Nice.
And it's cheaper than gin.
That's true, actually. What about your mum then? After because she was relatively young as well then. She was 7. Oh, when my dad died. Yeah. Oh, yes. She would have been 52. And then
53.
again, obviously, she's lost her firstborn. She's now lost her husband.
Yeah.
How on earth was she?
Well, there's a bit I missed out about my father, which has just come back to me, in that we found out latterly that he tried to get in touch with my brother through spiritualism.
Okay.
I know not why or anything like that. But my mother, again, wasn't someone who you'd see weeping and wailing.
Okay.
She was very stoic, as I said. But I do know that she got involved in, I think it was called TOC, TOC with a capital H. And I have no idea what that stood for. But it was effectively what we now call grief counselling for other people. Okay. So she threw herself into helping other people, which would have been typical of her, to be honest with you. I may have got that TOC completely wrong, so someone will correct me on that. So she spent a lot of time, you know, working with other people covertly. This is the best way of putting it. I mean, like sort of Freemasonry, as you well know, is a society which a lot of the family have been involved with, which does help charities, but never for the publicity that other organisations attract, which was something that initially drew me to it, although I didn't have the time. Not that I didn't have the time, I literally didn't have the time. Yeah. So I had a burgeoning career at the time. So I think she did the sort of equivalent of that. So she sort of silently raising money, silently doing coffee mornings, that sort of thing, and always had quiche on the go, which...
I love quiche.
Do you? I like a nice quiche, but some of these look like... when I see the people that produce them, I think, they look remarkably like dead skin in there.
I love a quiche Lorraine.
Yeah, quiche Lorraine, yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting that she did that. And that was her way of... That was her grief relief.
Yeah, it was her grief relief, yeah.
Going back to the name of the podcast. I always forget I need to actually ask that question.
Yeah.
But you mentioned your long walks and your Moody Blues and your gin.
Yeah.
And then obviously your mum passed away. But this was some years later.
1999.
Okay.
So 19 years after my father died,
Yeah. Did she ever remarry? Did you ever meet anyone again? No. Again, that kind of wasn't really done either.
No, it wasn't. No. No, it wasn't. You know, and as a society, we're very poor at dealing with that. You know, and music's been a big part of my life. You know, and there are certain songs which resonate with me on things like that. It's called Cats in the Cradle. Yeah. You know that one?
Yeah, and the Silver Spoon.
Yeah. So I'll be around. I'll come around. Oh, I'm too busy to come around this weekend or whatever it might be, and you don't do it, and they end up dying, and you think, oh, I should have done that.
Yeah.
She never remarried. She moved in with my grandmother. They sold both their houses and bought a big Victorian house, which they split into 2 flats.
Lovely.
One upstairs, one downstairs. So they kind of looked after each other, but had their independence.
Yeah.
And then she actually, by that time, let me think, when my dad died, my older sister was pregnant with what would have been my parents' first grandchild. So,
okay.
So my father never met his grandchildren.
Shame.
So my sister was living in Selsdon at the time. So she was doing a lot of visiting there. Then subsequently my sister moved to America, to New York, and then down to Memphis. And my mother used to go and visit her quite a lot.
Okay.
And my other sister moved to Germany with the British Forces School as a teacher. They're both teachers.
Yeah.
And my mother used to go over there quite a lot. So she actually, in her late 60s, probably in the 50s and 60s, did a lot of international travel.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that was 30 years ago, that was no mean feat.
No.
But she was not a particularly well woman. She didn't look after herself particularly well after my brother or my father died. She was more overweight than she should have been.
Right.
And I think she just let herself go, and then you can understand why that might be the case.
Of course, yeah.
But she managed to get herself around a lot, and do quite a lot. So and that was really weird. When she died. Well, of course, it's weird when someone dies, but it was bizarrely at the pinnacle of my career. I'd just been through a management buyout in 1999, made a shed load of money. So I was able to help her financially.
Okay.
And bought this motorised scooter, British Racing green and leather, the whole lot, for her.
Like a Jag.
Well, he was. That's why I did it, actually, funnily enough. And then she dropped down dead 3 weeks later. I thought, how grateful. My sisters will be roaring when they hear that, because that's what I thought. How bloody ungrateful. Yeah, I did.
What
all
was the
this.
residual value on the electric scooter? Did you get any money back?
No, it went off to another family member. But it was bizarre, really bizarre. I got to tell you this story, and I know that there's humour in everything, and that's one of the joys of listening to this, is you can find joy in these things, and you can communicate that to other people, and then it's okay to laugh. In fact, it's very cathartic to laugh. My mother. It wouldn't have been unexpected for my mother to become ill, let's put it that way.
Okay.
She'd had a tough time. And she called me up one morning. She said, I feel really, really bad, been up all night being sick and all the rest of it. She said, do you think you come round? I said, okay, all right. So I went round there. And she was ill. You could see she was about the colour of that cup, which is white. I phoned up the doctor, again with family friends. I lived next door to one of them. And he came round and said, I think we better get her into the hospital. I said, okay. So went into the local hospital. And then she'd had what they would euphemistically call a turn.
Okay.
In those days, a turn. Never really knew what that meant.
No. But it didn't matter. It could be anything, couldn't it? But she's taken a turn.
Taken a turn. And went home that night. About 11 o'clock, the hospital rang and said, oh, your mother's had another turn. I said, okay. Nothing much more we can do tonight. Okay, that's fine. So do you want me to come across? You can if you like. So, a bit strange. Drove across the hospital. I said, okay, where is she then? I said, oh, she's through there. Opened the curtain, she's dead.
What?
Yeah, they didn't tell me. They didn't say that she'd died. What they said to me was, there's nothing more we can do for her tonight. I'm thinking, well, that probably means to me in the morning you'll be doing something else. And there she was dead.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Was that the turn? What?
Yeah.
No.
I think she had another heart attack.
Yeah.
Is what it was. But they didn't actually tell me.
They didn't think to let you know when you started to walk into this?
No. Again, we live in more enlightened times.
You'd like to think.
You would like to think, indeed, you would like to think that. And it just, to me, it was just bizarre. So and that's when the sort of whole thing of, well, that's bloody rude. Sorry, swearing again. That's rude,
What about your mum or about the hospital?
Well, about everything I thought was rude at the time, Ungraciously, she died as soon as I could afford to give her something back. It's stupid looking back, isn't it, what you think about? But as opposed to the two previous deaths, I believe, and again, you have to ask my sisters this question, or they may comment, I think that brought us a lot closer, the two of us, at that time. And I remember being in stitches of laughter with my older sister, particularly, discussing what we were going to have played at the crematorium.
Oh no. Yeah, go on.
Burn Baby Burn was what we were going to have. Disco Inferno, because we were kids of the 70s, of course, and we just thought it was funny.
Yeah.
Till an uncle pointed out probably that's inappropriate.
Yeah.
And being a vicar, we sort of went along with.
Right. Okay.
So.
But it would have been great.
It would have been. I mean, that's why I think the whole sackcloth and ashes thing of funerals and so on should all be what's the word? Blown up, if you like.
Yeah.
You know, I think it should be a time of celebration, not a time of.
Which is what we spoke about with our mums.
Yeah.
A quick side story, but I think I'll get some of these details wrong. My kind of would-be brother, as it were, Mick, who we speak about quite a lot, who is very close to my dad. When his real father, not that my dad was a substitute, but when Mick's dad died, it was at the Hastings crematorium, and they gave the cassette over, and it was track number 2, which was Elvis Presley. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the track, but it was supposed to be Elvis Presley, something or other, track number 2. Well, because they put the CD on and just went press play, track number 1, and it was dun, 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 burning, it's a ring of fire, and it played out at the creme.
Yeah.
Of course, now very funny story.
Yeah, but at the time,
and as me as a Liverpool fan, great. One of our little stadium chants, as it were. But you can't write that, can you?
You can't, and I think that, and to me, knowing we were going to have this conversation, I'd thought about myself. I can't think of anybody else's head, can I? So I was obviously thinking to myself that how did they contrast and compare a death in the 70s, death in the 80s, and a death in the 90s, effectively.
And at very different times of your life.
Yeah,
and have you read my questions? Because that's...
No.
I was going to ask
you
that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And how you've dealt with those
well, I think obviously
deaths.
I've matured. Well, I haven't matured. Some would say I've gone backwards, but...
You've got older. That's different to be...
Yeah, that is true. It's all a question of semantics, isn't it? I think society has changed dramatically in that time. We had the issue of not long after the Second World War, stiff upper lip, big boys don't cry, get back on the horse.
And as you say, there had been so much death.
There had been.
How dare you grieve?
Yeah, exactly that. And I do get that. I do get that. My father, because this whole thing about when you come across it, I'm sure, with your brother, when you're a bloke in your 20s, you're going to change the world. You really are going to change the world, and everybody over the age of 30 is a complete imbecile. Okay. And so there was an element of that, the angry young man about me, A lot of angst. And not only just the manifestation of my father's death, but also that was the impulse behind my drive in my career as well, and my life generally in my 20s. So there was an element of that you could take that extra burden on because you were younger and fitter and mentally more agile. And the time you get to the 80s, had we had AIDS by then? Well, not had we had AIDS, but had AIDS been around then?
Yes, it was started kind of the early 80s and then really was kind of 85, 86.
Oh, well, maybe that's... Yes.
I've just been watching It's a Sin. It's on Channel 4.
Oh, right, okay.
And it's a new
Okay. Well, I think that
it
did a lot for changing the way in which we deal with grief, I believe, and the way in which we deal with sections of society which hitherto would have been perhaps kept undercover. I can't think of the right word to describe it. But it brought a lot more out into the open. And people question things like, why do we have these Victorian ways of, why not just have, a happy... Why don't we celebrate someone's life rather than grieve for it? Because in actual fact, the grieving process is what I am personally missing.
Okay.
So, puts into context, and to answer your question, I think to myself sometimes, it would have been nice to have had a brother who was a bit older than me, or go out for a pint or whatever. Chances are he might have married someone I couldn't stand, and we'd have fallen out.
Right.
You actually grieve for things that you don't know would have been qualified.
Yeah.
You just don't know. Or he could have moved to Australia and haven't seen him for 20 years.
Him, yeah.
You just don't know. So you can't. You can. The grieving process doesn't bring that person back. All it does is it gives you a way to, if you like, bloodlet about what might have been.
Yeah.
And the answer to solving what might have been is to do it today. So, phone your grandmother or your uncle or your father or your brother or your cousin or someone else's wife or whatever. Did I just say that?
Maybe not someone else's wife.
Did I just say that? I didn't mean that. I know
what you mean, though.
Or someone else in the family, another aunt or something like that.
A maiden aunt.
A maiden aunt,
yeah.
So, there is no time like the present to keep it going, because grief is often just, I should have done that.
Yeah.
It's a personal. And that's why I believe it's so personal. because I had a choice. I didn't phone them, or I didn't go around and see them, or I chose not to attend that family meal or whatever, and now I regret it. This is what I think it is. So to answer your question less long-windedly, I think society changed dramatically in that period of time, as it has done since, of course, and bringing it right up to date with the sort of COVID-ness of the situation we find ourselves in at the moment. I think the long protracted Facebook goodbyes have almost perversely pushed that back a bit.
Okay, how do you mean?
Well, I mean, the worst possible thing for me would be if I had some incurable illness, is for me in a bed with people all around me looking at me. I couldn't think of anything worse.
Okay.
I could not think of anything worse. I'm talking about in hospital, this sort of thing. And, the old question comes up, well, what do you want to do with your body when you're dead? I don't know, I'm not going to be there, so it doesn't mean make my...
Medical science.
Doesn't mean, well, a field day, wouldn't it?
Give mine to medical science, that's what I want. I've got a donor card.
Bash my liver to pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, my brother's body went to science because, we're jumping right the way back now. They thought he had something called, and as a child, 13-year-old child, I thought this was hilarious, something called Van Willebrandt's disease. Because they had the name Willie in there, I thought it was hilarious.
Brilliant, yeah.
And basically it was to do with the capillaries breaking down in the body. We all got tested as kids, but we were okay. It wasn't that. I can imagine what my parents must have thought, trooping these other 3 kids in, thinking, well, none of them are going to see 20. Must have been horrific, mustn't it? And that's disjointed my story, but...
saying about these Facebook goodbyes and how society
I just think it's drawing it out a bit. Well, particularly the other person's in a coma at the other end. They don't really know what's going on. No, I mean, I'm not being critical of it. I'm just making a statement that, for me, that doesn't fit with me. But then it probably does fit with me with my stiff upper lipness.
Going back again.
Could be.
How interesting. I find it fascinating. And have you, obviously there are 3 major deaths as well. Have you had, grief since that, in more like modern times, if you will, that because you've never been to counselling, never done therapy, anything like that. I mean, this is your first therapy session.
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
Welcome to my therapy so far. But have you experienced any other sort of grief since then?
Well, my grandmother died after my mother.
Right.
And she was a very big influence on my life.
Okay.
Taught me everything I knew about drinking.
Right.
She was drinking bottle of champagne a day until she was 90. And the doctor said she should cut down, so she went to half a bottle a day.
Is that true, or are you
true
having
story?
me on?
No, definitely true story, yeah.
She drank a bottle of champagne a day?
She couldn't stand the stuff, she reckoned.
What an absolute lush.
I know. Well, she was born in 1900 and fast asleep, 1902, 1903, and she reckoned the best time she ever had were during the Roaring Twenties.
What was your grandmother's name?
Dora.
Oh, so if you listen to Be More Marjorie from Louise's one, I want to be more Dora, drinking a bottle of champagne a day.
Yeah.
Wowzers. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and if that was sort of more recently, has there ever been a time where you thought, maybe I need to speak to someone about this? I've experienced a lot of grief.
Never.
You just carried on.
No, never. No, and that's why I thought this podcast was so intriguing, is because my original profession is IT.
Okay.
Right? And you always seek to change the status quo with IT.
Yeah.
Can't stand status quo. They make a lot of rubbish hits.
I love status quo.
That was a joke. I know. I do like status quo.
I've seen them at Wembley.
Oh, yeah. They go on and on and on and on and on.
They've got
jokes.
like 4 keys. And that's it. Yeah.
No, they're brilliant. What are we talking about? I'm rambling.
No, I love it. You started off in IT.
Oh yeah. So you're always seeking to change the status quo. So I'm always intrigued by modern, which means different thinking to mine.
Yeah.
And how you can embrace that and how you can make change happen and all that sort of stuff. And I think just because it was wrong in my day doesn't mean it's wrong today, because society's changed. My parents wouldn't recognise this world we live in today, and I won't recognise the world my grandchildren will live in 30, 40 years' time. So maybe it's appropriate. I don't know. Maybe how would my life turned out differently?
Yeah, I mean, that's, as we always talk about with our PhD, in hindsight, it's one of those things. And you say about times as well, but again, given the region in which we live in and the different cultures, and as I said to you before we hit record, is that I have messages from people, you know, so there's you, a British guy of an older generation, saying that you were surprised at how open people are. I've had messages from people whom I don't know from very different cultures, and I'm talking subcontinent or Arab or different religions even. People who've told me that they would never go to therapy or counselling in case their family found out. That's a family. I had a young man message me saying that he's been secretly seeing a counsellor for a year after his mother died. Would never tell anyone. And on one hand, I do understand it, because even people of our culture and of my age find it strange.
And I find that quite sad, if I'm honest.
It's very sad. It's a shame.
You know, what works for me, or maybe hasn't worked for me, only Judgment Day will tell, has worked for me or hasn't worked for me, doesn't necessarily work for somebody else.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you think of some more repressed parts of the various societies globally that we live in, I'm all for that. You know, all people being whoever they want to be and doing whatever they want to do. It's a free world. Well, mostly a free world.
Well, yeah.
And, you know, if you need help getting through or being who you want to be, well, there's no shame in that.
No. Yeah,
it's just not for me.
No, exactly. It doesn't. Well, it doesn't appear to affect you, but so far we've got to speak to
lick
Jill,
windows.
we've got to speak to Liz, we've got to speak to your children, we've got to speak to your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right, very quickly before we wrap up,
Yeah.
because I know we have been talking for a long time, but it doesn't bother me at all, and I've said this before, I don't edit these podcasts. The only thing I edit is when somebody says something that they don't want to include or the cat comes in. So a couple of things was I wanted to ask you very quickly. I always ask if there's a podcast or an Instagram or a social media account that you like that makes you happy for whatever reason that may be.
Yeah.
What have you got for me?
No such thing as a fish.
No such thing as a fish. It's a podcast.
Yeah.
I've heard of it, I think.
It's the QI team.
Yes.
I've got a sort of brain that remembers ridiculous facts.
Yes. Which is why you know our entire family history.
Yeah, well, it is the inquisitiveness side of my brain. And I just find it fascinating to come up with all sorts of absurd facts that you don't...
Is it hosted by Stephen Fry?
No, it isn't. It's...
oh, no. Alan...
I can't remember who it is now. It's not... It's I think it's the researchers who...
I beg your pardon,
who
right.
researched the stuff for QI.
So QI is BBC 1 or 2, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant kind of panel show.
Yeah.
And the knowledge is amazing. I mean, I love Stephen Fry.
Yeah, and there's another one I was going to use, which is the history of the English language.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah, and that's something that intrigues me as well.
Yeah, as a podcast.
Yeah.
No such thing as a fish. History of the English language.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, and I've started to put the links to these in like the notes and things. And very quickly before we wrap up, because I want to touch on it, you have just told me something before we hit record again that I never knew, which was where the surname Overy comes from. Yeah. And I don't just mean geographically, the actual name of it.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Well, it literally means over the water.
Okay.
Or sometimes a stream near the water or near the stream. In the same way, Surrey is south of the Rye, which is Rye is, I think, an old English name for a river. So Overy means over the Rye.
Surrey is south of the river, Rye being river.
It was told to me, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Surrey.
Yeah.
And we are over the river.
Yeah.
And because the first Overy was in Southwark Cathedral.
The St Mary Overy convent.
Yes.
Is where Southwark Cathedral is now.
Right.
I don't know whether that convent still exists or not, but
it's
quite easy to research. If you look at Southwark Cathedral and St Mary Overy, and it was also spelled in those days Overie.
No.
Yeah.
Because I'm a Katie with an IE. So imagine if I was Katie with an IE and an Overy with an IE.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
And because again, it's such an unusual surname, people never forget it. People still question that Overy, and I go, yep. And because, like I said to you, because of the legacy of my dad, and I don't want people to forget my name ever. I go, I'm very proud of it now. Whereas obviously at school you're like Overy, Overy.
Yeah.
Richard Overy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Have you? I'd be interested to chat to you in the sort of following weeks after you get the feedback from your family.
Yeah.
To find out Well,
whether I've been ostracised.
Whether you've been ostracised or not.
I might have been sent to Coventry, you never know.
Gosh, that's an old English expression, isn't it? But no, I do genuinely mean it, and it's been interesting for me as well, because, again, the point of the podcast is that we've never met. I don't know your story, and so it's a complete stranger asking questions that people really want to know the answers to. You know, I'm fascinated, but if you met someone, you would never be able to ask, I think, in normal circumstances, well, did you actually get on with your dad? Did you actually like your dad? Or did you get on with your brother and what have you? So I really appreciate you being so open.
That's fine.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, if there is anything that you've listened to today or you've been affected by anything on today's podcast, feel free to reach out. Let me know if you want to reach out to Richard. If you're an Overy listening and we're related, contact us. I want to know all about it. But go ahead and follow us on Instagram. It's at That Grief Relief Podcast. On Twitter, it's Grief Relief Pod. If you've got a story to tell or anything that you want to let me know about, you can send me an email. It's thatgriefreliefpodcast@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, give us a review, do all of that malarkey. And I think that is every angle covered. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Should we have a cup of tea?
Aye.